First of all, I'm Representative Christine Watkins. I represent most of Duchesne, all of Carbon, and most of Emory. And I'm always proud to say that I represent the fossil fuel corridor, even though I don't represent Uintah County of Utah. Before I say anything else, I just wanted to give a big shout out and thanks to our bronze sponsors. We have Williams, we have SWCA, New Era, SOS, Jacob Catalyst, Moser Energy, Vernal City, Stealth Management Group, the Uintah Basin Healthcare, Beatty and Wozniak, Caragen Systems, Ashley Regional Medical Center, Imperative Chemical. I got to have dinner with them last night. Freemeyer and Associates and Montrose Environmental. So thank you and a big shout out to them, because without the sponsors, this wouldn't really happen the way it does. You've listened to some of our other representatives and senators about what we're doing in the legislature and the things that are going on. The one thing I want to tell you, I've been in the legislature 13 years now, and this is the first year that we normally just go to 1 or 2 conferences during the year, and they, with all sorts of other legislators, sometimes in the western states, some all over the United States. This year, we have all been getting special invites to energy conferences. This has never really happened before. We're getting it, they always say it's both sides of the aisle. I've got a rep here who said this is his 23rd that he's gone to this summer. I've had other things going. I've had to turn some down, but we've been all over going to energy conferences because everyone is realizing we have an energy crunch coming up, or it's here, and we need to address it, do the same thing that we do with oil and gas, and that is make it easier for us, for you to do the work that you're doing. I passed a couple of bills last session, one on the electrical grid and the other one on Class 6 wells that we're trying to get the primacy for. So it is really an honor to represent you. I have a son who's a driller, and he's a dang good one, I'll tell you that. So I have a little part of that. Later this morning, we will welcome back Mark Michelle with the DHIP, I think I said that right, group. Mark will be providing an update on the Uintah Basin Railway Project. And first, I would like to welcome Gordon Larsen. Gordon, wherever you are. From the 50 states, who will be moderating a panel on the national policies and the impacts on the industry. Thank you.
So we have all known each other for many years, and I will say that you all know this already, but Utah punches above its weight in Washington, D.C., and particularly on a lot of the public lands and energy issues. And the reason for that is that we have a lot of really good people, including a lot of folks that work behind the scenes on behalf of Utah. And Sam and Luke and Emmy have all been a critical part of that for many years at various times in key positions. So let me just really quickly introduce them. You've got the full bios in your program, so I won't go too in the weeds, but Emmy Lesofski is the director of the Governor's Office of Energy Development, which she took about a year, 2 years ago? Is that about right? A year ago. Feels like 10 years, yeah. But prior to that, Emmy worked for a long time in the U.S. Senate, most recently as the Republican staff director for the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior and Environment, so having a lot to do with issues important in Utah. Luke Johnson is a partner at the Bernhardt Group. He was the director of the deputy director of the Bureau of Land Management in the George W. Bush administration, and prior to that was a longtime staffer on public lands and energy in the Utah delegation for Representative Jim Hansen and then for Senator Bennett. And then Sam Crofts is right now in the thick of things. Sam is the policy director for the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee under Chairman Mike Lee, and it's been a busy year for you all. So we're going to talk about a lot of topics, some specific ones, but the one this week that's on everybody's mind in D.C. is as it always is, it's the end of September, so it's the perennial shutdown debate, and So I want to just start off with a little bit of an update from you all on what's happening, what's the atmosphere right now, how might the possibility of a shutdown impact operators and folks in the energy industry. So maybe I can start with Sam. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, and it's so great to be here and see a lot of familiar faces. It's really exciting to get everybody in the same room, and couldn't be a more opportune time to talk about these issues. On the shutdown, if you read the news, it's looking like increasingly likely that the government may shut down here at the end of September due to an impasse over funding the government. I think in terms of, I can speak a little bit to the politics and how the situation might resolve itself, and then we can talk a little bit maybe about how the various agencies may handle a shutdown. From our position, we have, to the latter point, we have advocated for, to the extent possible, a continuation of operations in terms of processing permits and things like that to the maximum extent possible under the law. There are flexibilities under the law of using fee dollars to perform certain essential operations within the government. It's still, they're still ironing out the wrinkles in terms of how exactly they may navigate that. I know that those decisions are being made right now within the administration. In terms of the broader politics, there's this impasse where Republicans have offered what's called a clean CR, continuing resolution, basically over a set time period to fund the government, continuing at current spending levels. Congressional Democrats, so Leader Schumer and the minority leader in the House, Hakeem Jeffries, have been very aggressive in terms of asking for other funding priorities to be included in a CR, and that's kind of where the impasse is at. I don't know what the path to, that's a little bit above my pay grade in terms of the path to resolving that. Obviously everybody hopes that can be resolved soon, but I think in the meantime, we're just trying to be the navigators and a liaison between you all and these agencies in terms of handling whatever happens.
I would just add to that, obviously it's the preference of industry to continue those operations, and there is precedent for that. During the first Trump administration, that was the direction that was given, both on the permitting side to continue to operate off of that permit authority, and I think operators saw really largely a continuation of the status quo in terms of being able to have permitting continue. Same for, I know, parks and some of the other things that the Department of Interior manages. So hopefully that'll be the case. I think there'd be, that would be tough to take a different approach for them, but we'll see how some of this navigates out. Every shutdown's a little bit different in its dynamic. I think to some extent, of the politics of it didn't go well for Schumer the last time. And so he's obviously in a little bit of a fix of needing to feel like he is taking the fight to Republicans, can't just roll over and accept what has been offered to him. But it's largely kind of a box of his own making. And so we'll see how some of that plays out, but it's, I think it'll be not so much about what he gets or what his leverage is for some policy objective, but far more how to navigate out of the political box that he has. And it'll largely come to what is the point of pain at which the politics change, and then he can consent. So I don't know if Emmy previously served on appropriations, so she probably has a lot to say on this.
I'm grateful that it's my hobby now and not my full-time job. But also grateful to be in a place where we don't deal with this kind of foolishness at the state level, right? We understand what our job is, and we know we have to continue to do it because it's important to the constituents and people of Utah. It's important to our industry, and we just need to keep trucking along. From the federal perspective, I think depending on the length of the shutdown, that's always again, this is my hobby response. The length of the shutdown will determine in many ways sort of what the impact is. If it's short, you shouldn't notice. But the biggest concern that I think about is whether or not the agencies have the ability to and the funding to continue moving. It is if you get that one person who's like, I'm not funded, I'm not doing anything, it impacts the will of people to get things done. And from the governor's perspective, from the state's perspective, we don't want to waste any time on being slow for no reason. We want to just keep moving forward. And so I think for me, that's the biggest concern I have is that from the signaling and just if you get people who just aren't going to be able to do anything or won't do anything because they feel like they don't have to, at any point in the chain, that is a real stinker. But we're really fortunate that the administration is intolerant of that type of behavior. So I think hopefully we won't notice. It'll be short and it'll be over pretty quickly.
No, that's a great answer. Anybody want to handicap it? Like a 50% chance, 70% chance?
Chance of whether it happens
Whether
at all?
it happens at all.
90 plus.
Yeah.
I think at this point they've played chicken for so long, it would be awkward if they didn't do something and try to find some leverage.
Yeah.
But if it goes on like the really long one that was, I mean, if you get to the point where people aren't getting paid, then everybody loses. So the politics of it will determine how it all goes.
And I think the length of it is the most uncertain. I'm much more confident that there will be some shutdown, but the length of it, I think there's a lot less confidence, in part because, as we were talking of, it's basically at the point of political pain that you decide to end it.
I'll just point out one other dynamic that's not entirely unique, but maybe a little bit more unique is the president and his budget office have sort of signaled that they welcome the opportunity to use a shutdown to sort of fire additional people, and that's a dynamic. Go ahead.
But like, be careful. Don't fire the people that we need in order to
Yeah.
get stuff done. And I think that's one of the things that concerns me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Okay, so let's take. We're going to dive into some more specific topics, but let's just talk energy writ large. So I want to have each of you respond to. You've been in our collective decades in Congress. I won't say how long it is, but it's a lot of decades. Yeah. So you've seen lots of changes. We've all seen lots of changes in the federal energy policy-making landscape over time. So maybe just kind of share some thoughts on changes that you've seen, kind of the moment that we're at now. You've seen the prices of energy drive changes. We've seen changes in permitting reform, which we'll get into more. But where are we at right now, and over maybe the last 10 or 20 years, how have you seen things shift? And maybe I'll start with Luke on this one. Any thoughts on how you've seen it change over your career?
Well, I would just add, if you look back at, Sam can speak a little bit more to the Senate Energy Committee, but the work of the Senate Energy Committee, and then saw a colleague, Alan Freemeyer, who was staff director of House Natural Resources long ago. But the work of those committees, of what they were focused on during that time period, has really changed. You think about where the focus was of Congress in the early 2000s, and kind of talking about some degree of scarcity, and then the shift largely to the gratitude of this industry of one of abundance, and then importing energy versus exporting energy, and then obviously today we're talking about kind of on the as the prior administration's focus on climate and the shift to really a recognition of this massive necessity of every electron. I heard someone say last week, no electron left behind, of needing everything you possibly have as you look at data center needs for AI, and that race to compete is really kind of the critical focus of, I know we'll talk probably about some of what's taking place on the permitting front as well, but that kind of colors the necessity of everyone recognizing how much energy and how much you need to bring online in the near future. And that really kind of demonstrates some of the prior prisms have really changed, and where we are today is very, very different from what the committees may have been focused on years ago.
That's a great answer. Sam?
Yeah, it's been really interesting just to see even just within the last 2 years or so, there really has been a total change in terms of how we look at energy issues more broadly. All of us know and knew that there's no grand energy transition that was never real. But to see, just in terms of kind of broader rhetoric, there's been a really stark shift to this really urgent issue that we have in front of us of we have supply that over the last, however many years has been trending not upward, sometimes downward in terms of electrons. But, demand, you look at some of the statistics that are out there in terms of demand that we're seeing right now, but also over the next couple of years for a variety of reasons, but number one is probably AI. It's kind of alarming, but it's also very interesting from kind of a policy-making perspective that we've got this really complex and really consequential question in front of us of how are we going to address this energy crisis, energy emergency, which is real. And we've got to figure out how and what that looks like from kind of a policymaking perspective. The last thing I'll say on this is it has been really refreshing, I think, to see, under the last administration, we saw kind of a whole of government, every agency focused on climate change. That has totally shifted to where now every single agency, it seems like, is focused on solving this energy supply crisis that we have. And you hear a lot more talk about the need and necessity for reliability, which is something that I think we've all probably taken for granted in the past.
And I would add, too, that as I think about the span of my career in Congress and now being at the state where in the beginning we were talking in Congress about we've hit peak oil and all that kind of stuff to now, that one of the major differences I see as well is as the energy conversation has changed and as we have a second Trump administration where we know we have a time-limited period, the administration is so aggressive about not just understanding the problem, but saying, how are we going to tackle it? What are we going to do? And they're moving at the speed of light compared to how previous administrations have handled things. And so I think that ability to put actual action behind the recognition that we need to make sure that we're leaning into energy security really hard is something that makes this time period unique and a space where we collectively need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take advantage of the next few years and get in a place where we have durability of the decisions that are made now so that we can benefit from them, not just in the next administration, whatever that brings, but as we look down decades and generations beyond this. So.
Yeah, we may follow up and talk a little bit more about the ways in which the executive branch and Congress are trying to make permanent some of these changes, or at least insulate them from future changes. But something just to drill down a little bit on something Emmy said. Governor Cox a couple days ago at a conference up in Idaho Falls, and it was focused on nuclear. But he said something real interesting. He said what we're learning now, and he was referring to some of the permitting that the Department of Interior has done in Utah very, very quickly, in less than a month. And he said that what we're learning is that there's not something special about time. And we just tend to think that, like, the longer a review is, the more thorough and better it's going to be. And he's like, that's just not true. Time is just time. And you can do something much more quickly than we've become accustomed to it. And so that I think you're seeing that, and you all spoke to that there's a sense of, like, innovation and aggression. Like, let's just drill down and ask questions about why we take so long to do some of these things. Go ahead, Luke.
Well, I was just going to add, that is part of some of the great leaps forward in terms of infrastructure that have taken place, largely been because of that recognition of when there's the imperative to move forward. People recognize, to the point that you were making and that the governor made, there is nothing magical about a long, lengthy period that produces better environmental outcomes. I think the environmental community largely has been successful over time in persuading everyone with this myth that if it goes on for 5 years, that's an incremental, incrementally better than if the decision had been made in a month or 2 or 3 months or something of that variety. And, that, I think the permitting paradigm, again, I know we'll get to this in a little bit more detail, but really has been broken for a long time with the idea that these long, lengthy periods of time somehow produce better environmental outcomes.
Yeah, that's a good epiphany. So let's talk a little bit about one of the kind of generational changes that we've had here in the last few months. So the Inflation Reduction, in my view, terribly named, deceptively named Inflation Reduction Act during the Biden administration made a lot of changes, many of which were just reversed. And so I want to ask about some of the changes that came out of what we call the One Big Beautiful Bill. It's a process that we call reconciliation, where Congress goes back in and makes a lot of changes through some arcane procedures that limit what can actually be done, and maybe Sam can talk a little bit about that. But it made a lot of changes to the energy industry. Went back to some royalty percentages from prior to the IRA, changes to methane, changes to tax credits. So maybe just talk about what were the most consequential pieces of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, particularly for the energy industry. Maybe we can start with Sam on this one.
Yeah, no, happy to. And this has been my entire life, really, for the last couple of months. So I'm happy to talk as much as we want about some of our work. Well, first I'll say, in terms of our committee, so Senator Lee from Utah, new chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and our jurisdiction is the Department of the Interior, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and the Department of Energy. Within our jurisdiction, we knew at the start of this year that we were going to have this really unique kind of generational opportunity to draft an energy title for this budget reconciliation bill. And we took that really seriously. It's rare that you get an opportunity to actually legislate something as consequential and as needed as kind of the opportunity that we had. And so, over the last really from last November after the election until we ultimately passed it in July, this is just about all we were doing for 60 hours a week. We were able to achieve a lot of really important, I think, wins for all forms of energy, but especially on the oil and gas front, I think we were very successful in terms of everything that we tried to do, we were able to accomplish on that front. I'll speak very high level, just a couple of those things to highlight. First focus for us was leasing. Again, in budget reconciliation, everything that you do, it's not like a normal piece of legislation. Everything that you do has to have a direct budget effect. And the policy change can only be what they call merely incidental to that budget effect. And, lease sale revenues are one of the primary budget levers that we had within our jurisdiction. And so our focus was on juicing that as much as we possibly could. Opening really from where we were over the last 4 years, where there was initially the moratorium on lease sales, and then you all know the sales that we actually got were not all that great. We tried to do a complete 180 there, but in addition to mandatory lease sales on federal lands and in federal waters, we also were able to do some things at the edges. We got really important language for regulatory flexibility for commingling, which I know is of interest to many of you. To your point, we were able to lower the royalty rates for both onshore and offshore. Along with, we increased the duration of an APD from 3 to 4 years. Again, all this is to provide as much durability and as much certainty as you can. To the point that Luke made, this administration is really focused on achieving these wins in the short time frame that we have. We were looking from the perspective of how can we make those things last, and how can we provide some durability and some certainty to make sure that once we don't have a friendly administration to oil and gas, that those lease sales are still occurring, that we actually can get permits to drill and have some regulatory flexibility there. And so ultimately, we were really excited with everything that we were able to accomplish. And you just look at the revenues that provides to our state and our essential operations and infrastructure here locally. I think it's just huge, and we were very excited with that.
And I'll just sort of piggyback on that and say the durability of the statutory requirements that are in the reconciliation bill. When I think about what's happening in the basin and across the state, and how we're really proud to be the home of all of this activity, we recognize that these are gigantic investments that if you're on a constant 4-year cycle of pinging and ponging all over the place, it makes it hard to invest and hard to, for the communities that rely on those investments. And so that durability in the reconciliation bill, I think, for the horizon that it lasts is really important in order, when you think about it, actually, it has an impact on the ground as opposed to just being some highfalutin policy idea. It actually makes a difference on how the investments go and how long we can sustain, the pace of work that we need in order to make those decisions. So,
I could just add to that as well too. I think we were talking just a few moments ago about kind of that longer-term picture of the decades in Congress. I think, frankly, to Chairman Lee's credit and Sam and the rest of the team, I think some of the deliverables in that bill are amongst the most consequential deliverables, particularly for oil and gas, in a generation. They're really consequential, significant things that came about through that legislation. I know, there are other controversial topics that are part of the mix in that kind of obscure some of what was actually delivered in that. But again, to their credit, I think Chairman Lee and Sam and that team just deserves a ton of credit for what I think are really, really consequential wins.
That's great. Oh, huge kudos. And as Emmy said, uncertainty has its own costs, and so being able to have Congress as opposed to administrative tasks, having Congress weigh in was critical. So let's drill down a little bit more on one of the kind of undone tasks ahead of us. So a couple of years ago, there was a debt ceiling deal that had some reforms to permitting, and that was good. It was progress. It was kind of the low-hanging fruit, I think it's fair to say, stuff that was pretty easy to do politically. So since that time, I know Sam and others have been working on trying to find some pathway for a broader and more significant reform to permitting, including to NEPA. Maybe just talk a little bit, maybe the judicial review piece of that, a few other pieces that are still kind of left out hanging there, and how significant that would be, and what are the pathways that we might see Congress pursue?
Yeah, well, so to preface this by saying, as a non-lawyer, I'm very fortunate to work for somebody who is a brilliant legal mind. And one thing that you will hear Chairman Lee talk about a lot is, to your point, we have created over the years a massive cottage industry around environmental litigation, and it is a really big problem. And when you talk about it, permitting reform is a really hot topic. One funny thing about that conversation is that permitting reform probably means something different to everybody that you talk to. But a lot of the focus tends to be on the pre-record of decision process. But I would say much more, not that is not important, but much more important, much more consequential is what happens after a ROT is signed and kind of the litigation and the problems that come from that. And so, we have been really focused on how to tackle. It's a really complex issue to address because there's so much money involved. If you look at the fees that the federal government pays on these environmental lawsuits, it's just extraordinary. And it's really hard to go up against that. In permitting reform, you've got to do something bipartisan, and so there's a really big challenge to kind of hurdle there. The other challenge, I think, is in Congress, you have these committees that have very specific jurisdictions. And so for us, we have our jurisdiction, which does not include the underlying environmental statutes like NEPA or the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. Those are in the Environment Committee jurisdiction. But if we're going to do something on permitting reform, that needs to be real and consequential, you kind of have to span multiple committee jurisdictions. It's also different on the House side. And so you bring in, kind of a lot of cooks in the kitchen that have different priorities, and that's just a logistical challenge as you're trying to negotiate something. And that's something that we're working through right now is making sure that our committees are talking to each other, that we're coordinated. Everybody, I think, on the Republican side understands the urgency of addressing kind of the judicial reform piece, and also, some of the agency process parts of permitting reform. But it is, I won't sugarcoat it. It really is going to be a challenge to kind of overcome some of those hurdles, and then just the politics around it. We've got this Republican trifecta government. It's like I said, it's going to take a bipartisan deal, and it's going to be really interesting over the next couple of months, which this will be our top focus over those months to kind of see how this plays out. But in terms of prioritization, it's up there at the top.
Yeah, it's good. And Luke, I want to turn to you, but maybe also, I noticed, I was glad to see on the agenda, I don't remember if it was yesterday or sometime today, but a discussion of the 7-county decision. I think in Utah, we tend to think that's great for Utah, good decision, without realizing that this was a massive decision for the whole country in terms of how the courts interpret NEPA, how we interpret NEPA. So maybe, Luke, go ahead and respond, and if you want to throw that in there as well.
Sure. If you look at that decision, the court reminding of the origins of NEPA and that this is really a procedural statute, it is enormously consequential. But part of what the agency did, or what the Supreme Court did, is they provided a great degree of deference to the agencies for what that review is going to look like. And in an administration such as the one in which we're in right now, that really wants to permit things, the agencies are empowered to consider the environmental effects, to consider the proper scope of the decision making, and take an action and move ahead and get stuff permitted and operating. However, with that discretion, an administration that has a different philosophy, an administration perhaps that has a similar philosophy to the prior one as well, certainly could use that discretion to layer on a whole host of additional analyses as well that are dilatory or have other practical effects. And so when you look at that decision, there's the immediate aftermath of feeling as if there's a clear path ahead and the ability to march ahead and get stuff done. But there's also the back end of that as well too, and a recognition that's not necessarily a permanent fix. Congress really can and should step in and try and fill that gap and provide the kind of consistency and predictability that that companies need in order to invest in infrastructure and to continue on with certain judgments about what needs to take place. And that's really where the space that Congress ought to fill is in creating that permanence. One other thing that I'll add to that, this administration has obviously chosen to have a different point of view relative to some projects in the renewable energy industry. And you see some of those being unwound or having problems after decisions have been made. I certainly would not say that that's good policy. That obviously has some difficulties in terms of the subsequent effects. But both administrations of both parties, the prior administration, in fact, Emmy probably knows a bit about this as well, unwound certain decisions in Alaska by revisiting things with leases that historically had never been done before. And so really, the way to put that genie back in the bottle really has to come from Congress, and Congress providing that kind of certainty of where an investment's an investment, a decision is a decision, and absent truly exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, you're able to move ahead and proceed with the investment in the projects.
Yeah, and I think, Governor Cox always teases, and you know this well, that he says he's the NEPA governor because he's always talking about the problems with NEPA and how we need to be respectful of our environment. In Utah, we do a great job of balancing that. We think we don't have to make false choices between protecting the environment and developing our resources. And I think every meeting that I'm in about energy at large, there's two things that come up every time. One is workforce, which I know everybody is at the top of everybody's mind, but the other thing is permitting reform, whether it's talking about renewable energy or conventional or nuclear or whatever. Permitting reform is really at the top of the list because it hits everybody. It hits people who want to build bridges and highways and roads and everything else too. And so I think that we're hopeful from a state perspective that as we continue to work together and try to find the the solutions where everybody understands that we need to be able to move forward, because the decisions we make now don't just affect us today and in 2 years and 3 years. If you're talking about something like a transmission line, if it's going to take 15, 18 years to permit that, then that's, you're hitting generations down. And so we're hopeful that those discussions can continue, but the politics of it are really, really tough when you have to get 60 votes. So.
Yeah, and I do think that there is sometimes maybe an educational gap. Lawmakers aren't the ones that are actually financing these projects, and I think it's important for lawmakers to understand from a financing and a kind of a certainty perspective. You just can't, we can't be in a situation where every 4 years there's just this massive pendulum shift.
Well, and all to benefit basically an industry that benefits from getting paid to sue, yep. And then by threatening the economics of a project by dragging it out forever. I mean, sometimes you don't even have to get a bad decision, you just have to make it uneconomic, yeah. And that's just as bad.
And that's really been kind of a hidden tactic, is the idea that from the environmental community perspective, the idea has been, I just need to make this uneconomic. I don't need to kill it. I don't need to have an agency reach a no decision. I just need to basically slow walk it to death until it is no longer economic. And that's really where finally we have, both with the Supreme Court and then I think a bipartisan recognition of how completely broken the process is. Now, Sam mentioned something very insightful earlier before, of being able to say, you talk to every senator and member of Congress, and they'll all say that permitting is a top priority. Then you drill down a little bit to the specifics, and they all have something a little bit different in mind. And frankly, one of the challenges as well, too, in this environment of trying to legislate, that's also true of stakeholders. You start talking about, well, what specifically about NEPA do you want to change? And interestingly enough, work on a number of industry stakeholder groups and others, and the changes that are, or concerns are different, from Alaska to the lower 48. They're different if you're midstream versus upstream, and just some of the fixes are a little bit different and hit a little bit different when you get a little bit more granular. And it just presents some of the challenges. And then again, across stakeholders, a lot of different thoughts about how you fix that. I think for some of those that are concerned about transmission and some of those broader big issues, that's always kind of been the prism of that, the transmission folks, and then those who want to fix the core of what's been broken in NEPA, provide something of a general coalition where you can envision something getting done.
I mean, in leaning into a rising tide lifts all boats, I think that's where the bipartisan opportunity is, but the politics of the trifecta government make that really tough.
I will say one note of optimism that I've observed is, in my prior role for Governor Cox, I would interact with a lot of other governors across the country, and there was a bipartisan consensus around this. Now, again, it's not everybody defining it, permitting reform, exactly the same. In the East, they were frustrated. Governors in the East, including very blue state governors, were concerned about rights of way, that they couldn't get transmission lines through. So it was less NEPA and more of other sides of the permitting reform. But it is interesting that I think there is this sense now of almost national embarrassment that it takes us so long to build and it's so hard to do. And Governor Cox, I think, has correctly latched onto this and has been, one of the most vocal advocates for this abundance agenda. This, as Emmy said, sort of getting away from zero-sum thinking and recognizing that we can do both. We can protect the environment and we can have abundant energy and housing and infrastructure and what we need. So I may be naive in thinking that, but I do think that maybe there's a little bit of a lag with some members of Congress who have not recognized that it would be to their political benefit to recognize and aggressively pursue permitting reform. So I want to throw one to Emmy here. We've talked a lot about Department of Interior, which is obviously a real important player in energy discussions. Talk about Department of Energy. We have a Secretary of Energy, Chris Wright, who I've been supremely impressed with. I didn't follow him closely before he came into office, but he's, I think, one of our most eloquent spokesman for this idea of getting away from zero-sum thinking and aggressively pursuing energy without, we're not hurting the environment. In fact, we may be helping it better than those who thought they were helping it. So talk about how the relationship has changed with the Department of Energy, what some of the changes are doing that may impact Utah, what your office is up to in collaboration.
I think the biggest change that I would note is that they reach out to us a lot and say, how can we help? How can we help? How can we help? And having been a congressional staffer in my previous career and now being at the state, historically I would say you're getting in line and knocking on the door and saying, hey, can you help us? And they have a huge workload, every administration does, but we've seen, Interior's done this and DOE has really leaned in hard on what can we do as an agency to be helpful to the state. They're thinking creatively about how they can help us develop nuclear as a nation. They're trying very actively to say to us, hey, are there things that you need to do to keep your conventional resources healthy? How can we help with our, we've got money, we can do financing, opportunity. It's just sort of, at some point I'm like, whoa, let's make a really good list and find the ways that we can interact with this. But I think that it kind of just goes back to the whole ethos of the administration, which is we're not going to sit around and wait for things to happen. We're going to actively move to do that. And so in our office, we're participating with them at every turn in every way we think that we can benefit the state. They've certainly leaned into the energy resources that we have in the state that we think are important, and we're grateful for that. And we're willing to take every ounce of assistance that they'll give us in order to make sure that we're benefiting the people of Utah. So.
And if I could really quick just chime in, I don't work as much with the Department of Energy, but one thing that I have been really, really impressed with, especially Secretary Wright, but you see this throughout the administration, is using the platform to advocate for sound energy policy.
Yeah.
I've had the privilege of meeting Chris Wright a handful of times and just been so impressed with his ability to take these really complex ideas and synthesize them into something that makes sense for the average person. It's just been incredible, and seeing him advocate aggressively, not only for just American energy and for energy security, but taking, for example, this complex climate issue and reframing it in the context of, okay, well, let's talk about what actually benefits people. And kind of taking this like pro-humanist approach, it's just incredible to see that at the highest levels of government, and honestly, it's just been really, really refreshing and exciting because it shows that they're focused on the right things.
And I think for so many years, I would argue DOE just sort of wasn't an energy advocate.
Just
they
a
were a grant.
making,
I would
right?
say they just wanted to do grants. So like, you have a university that wants a grant, cool. Now they're like, hey, how do we actually get involved in energy and being proactive in, like you said, the human impact of things, which is a totally different frame of reference from my interactions with them over the last 25 years. So it's great.
No, I think that's right. He's figured out how to use the bully pulpit, even though he's not a regulator largely. He does not have the same authority as Secretary Burgum does to let projects move forward, but he's found this unique voice.
And he wants to advocate for the holistic approach. He doesn't say, oh, DOI is over here and DOE is over here, and we're going to make our grants and let them do their parks. They're talking, he and Burgum are talking together. The administration is working holistically to say, hey, to your earlier point, Sam, they're working to make it so that things can actually happen. And feels like a miracle.
And that's one thing that we probably should mention has been really unique about this administration is that this idea of the National Energy Dominance Council, they're still working out the kinks, it's still very new, but it has the potential to be very, very useful and effective. For a long time, you've had this challenge of getting these federal agencies and regulators talking to each other, and that is the entire purpose, and it's this office that's housed within the White House of, okay, if you've got a project you're wanting to invest in bringing something online, well, a lot of the delay in the past has been, it's had to go through multiple agencies. You may need a permit from the EPA, you may need something from Interior. And so the idea is let's get these agencies talking to each other, but also they've been very effective at advocating for American energy interests on kind of this broader and even international stage, which I think has been really cool to see.
That's great. Well, so this has been great conversation. I want to ask, and I'll start with Luke on this. Talk about what advice you might offer to those in the room for impacting, engaging with their policymakers, trying to help get priorities across the finish line with the administration or with Congress. What counsel would you have for them?
So I think what I would say is a recognition that with policymakers, particularly on the executive branch side, they have such a modest amount of bandwidth in how they can choose to spend their time. And so if you walk in and you are presenting a problem and you don't have a solution, you may persuade them that something is a problem, but they walk out of that interaction with you, and if they don't have something to operate with, they're going to, what you're raising and the issue that you're raising with them is likely just to peter out, and there's not much that's going to take place with that. What I would suggest is on any of these items, I think the more specific that you can be, in fact, getting quite granular in what you're asking them to do, how to do it, recognizing what their decision space is, what they have the discretion to do, what they don't. The more sophisticated what you're presenting to them, the more it's actionable. I would say, and kind of the focus of National Energy Dominance Council demonstrates how committed this administration is to energy. Nobody's going to walk in and have a bad meeting. They're going to express all the enthusiasm you want to see in someone who wants to do what you want them to proceed with. But the flip side of that, again, is you've got to be pretty granular in what you ask them to do and whether it's actionable and how to get there if you want results.
But I will say on that point, I think that granularity is really helpful because, I think one of our, from Senator Lee's perspective, one of our primary roles and responsibilities being a senator or at this platform as a committee chair is we want to be an advocate for all of you and kind of be that liaison with these agencies. It's really helpful when we have something that's very specific, because this administration, I've been really impressed with how responsive and helpful they've been when, even if it's just kind of a small right of way that has been hung up, just call them, flag it, and as long as it's a specific thing, it's usually pretty easy for them to go and call the right person and shake it loose.
And you guys said it perfectly, specificity and an actionable outcome that you want is super important. And I would also add that, from a state perspective, we have different relationships and different ways that we work with the agencies. But to the extent that you can make sure that you're looping the delegation in as well as the state, that way we're all singing from the same song sheet, and we can do best for Utah.
Yeah, those are all great answers. I will just add that, and many of you have a sophisticated appreciation for how Congress and the administration interact. But it does help to, not to overwhelm Sam here, but you can go straight to the Sam and Sam Crofts and his colleagues in the congressional delegation, even if it's not a legislative ask, even if it's something that requires administrative action or action from the White House. They have those relationships, and certainly you have oversight hearings. So cabinet members are keen to stay on the good side of the chairman. And to Emmy's point, there's levers with state government as well. And so as you talk to Emmy, as you talk to her counterparts in the governor's office, bring those challenges and those issues to them, and they'll always be willing to help. So why don't we just kind of do a quick wrap up here of any kind of final counsel or advice or thoughts on where we're at with energy policy at the federal level, anything that we didn't capture. Maybe about, we talked a little bit earlier on about the importance of creating certainty and how we're working with, hopefully the administration is working with Congress in various ways to not just get quick wins, but to get durable wins. Anything else that you think might be helpful for this audience?
Well, I think one just last point I'll add on this kind of idea of advocacy and how to be effective. We have really good nominees that are, these political appointees that are in place in these important jobs, whether it's at EPA or Interior. And those people, they really want to be helpful. A lot of them came from normal, whether it's from the industry or from other places, and they want to be helpful. They want to be effective. One really cool thing about that I didn't really grasp until I started working on this committee staff is, we through the nominations process, the Senate can and has the role to confirm these nominees. You develop a real close personal relationship with these really talented, smart people that have been appointed to these positions of leadership. So I would just say, like take advantage of that, and don't be scared that if you think your issue is maybe not important enough to make an ask. Again, these people, and I would include our staff in that. Like we all want to be helpful and want to move the ball forward on these things that we care about.
That's great. Go ahead, Luke.
Well, I think that's well said. And again, just emphasizing the point of as you do so, the more that whether it's with the Congress, with the executive branch agencies, the more information you have and the more ability to execute, that you're bringing something to someone that is actionable, I think the more likely you're going to see the outcomes. This really is an administration that wants to cite projects, wants to do things, particularly wants to have things that are deliverables to communities. It's just a tremendous opportunity. And if you operate that well with that level of specificity, I think there's never been a better opportunity.
And I just want to give sort of a plug for the Division of Oil, Gas, and Mining, who's working really closely with BLM to make sure that we're doing as much together and as seamlessly as we possibly can. As a state, we see all sorts of ways we can be helpful, and this administration is more interested in receiving assistance from the state and working together to make things happen. So we really appreciate the work of our federal partners and the work that they do with the state. And I think that we'll just keep leaning into that. And we're again, so grateful for all of the work that happens, not just in the basin, but statewide on the energy front. We know how important it is to the quality of life of Utahns and how important Utah is as a national energy resource. And so just thank you to everybody here for all the work that you do. And we're doing our best to work together to do the best for you so you can do the best for Utah.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for inviting us, and let's give everybody a round.